So let's talk about soil moisture and just basically rain in general right now. Do you go out and just like grab a clod of dirt and then test it for how much water is in it? Like, how does this even work for you to judge how much moisture there is in a field?
Yeah, so if you look at, historic, when everyone knows when it rained last and all of that, but we'll also go out, anytime we go out to field, we always have a shovel. We're going to dig a hole and just use the feel method. You can usually feel what that soil moisture is, what category it falls in just by touching it, feeling it, and, making it form a ribbon or not. Right now, I could say pretty much across Montana, it's dry. Like, I don't even have to dig a hole to tell you what it is. It's been really dry across the entire state.
So let's talk about what that looks like in reality for a farmer, because I think people hear about drought and every experience that we've ever had is, oh, I heard they had a drought and yet I still have all the groceries I need and the pineapples and the pears and peaches and everything that they want. So drought is basically meaningless to the people living in the city unless their grass turns a little brown.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you look at, we play on such a world market now that, for example, I think Montana grows, is it Montana or Kansas? I don't remember the stat, but 9% of the world's wheat. So it's not playing, a huge role into it. So if we have drought in Montana, we're not going to have a huge role in the wheat markets, across the entire world. So we're still going to have bread. If we don't have enough that's coming out of Montana, we'll pull it from Russia or somewhere else. So there's such a large global market that you might have a bad year somewhere, but somewhere else is having a good year. So it's not going to affect what you're going to see at the grocery store. But what it does affect is, I think, more of your local economies. So, when we have a dry year in Montana, ag is a pretty big sector. And so you'll see less spending in some of the, on some of the bigger ticket items. And so that money's not going to trickle down and move through the economy as much.
Yeah, you had an interesting line on your website. Stronger soils build stronger communities. What do you mean by that?
So as you have, as you start to do things, some cultural practices, as you start to add more diversity, as you get more cover on your soils, as you keep more living roots out there, you're really focusing on that soil biology. And soil biology, in some ways is going to keep us going. So I've heard a term like you kind of can make your own droughts or your own floods. So, and that's, loose, obviously. But if I go out there and I till a bunch of my, fields up, I'm going to open that up to evaporation. So we're going to lose a lot of soil moisture that might be stored there. When we do get a rainfall event, what's going to happen is all those particles that used to be soil aggregates, they were kind of buildings out there. They had sand, silt, and clay particles that were all stacked together, giving you a room for that soil biology, for air and water and nutrients to kind of thrive. And when you run a tillage implement through it, then you're basically just crushing that. So it's like a natural disaster, a hurricane or a tornado or something that's crushing all those aggregates. And so before anything productive can go on again, that soil biology needs to build that back up so that they have a place to work. If you've done tillage, you've lost a lot to evaporation, but then when you get your rainstorm, it takes those individual soil particles now and they can be dislodged and moved. And if there was an area for water to move in, it's now crusting over and water can't infiltrate as much. So you're losing a lot more of it to runoff and evaporation. So, just one event of not having soil cover and doing some disturbance, you can basically cause a drought that might last a while or cause a flood because you're rushing water off the field. So how we manage our soils and how they store and function can definitely cause some other issues offsite.
How bad is the drought right now around where you're at or with where your customers are?
Yeah, it's pretty bad. We haven't really, normally May and June are our wettest months. And I want to say, which is like 2 or 3 inches of rain in the month of June. And we've had, I think, like a 1/4 inch, something like that. So it's dry. Yesterday we had guys out in the dry land who were going to, basically our winter wheat isn't going to fill. So there's not going to really be anything to harvest out there. So they were going to try to take some for hay because hay is really short right now. And just going out and running the swather across the field started a fire.
Started a fire?
Mm-hmm. It's dry.
Wow. Well, talk about this. Like, you're talking about something that you're like, well, it started a fire. I mean, for most people, this is like an impossible thing to imagine without somebody saying it's possible.
Yeah, so basically, you have all this equipment out there. I mean, even just, we'll probably get here within the next week or so. I'd say we're going to get to the fire danger where you're not supposed to drive a pickup through a field after 1 o'clock in the afternoon, because that's when it starts to get really hot. Just like your catalytic converter, hitting a rock is enough of a spark with it being so dry for grass or a crop to start on fire right now. Fireworks have obviously already been outlawed for 4th of July. And so it's dry out there. So there's just not a lot of production, and everything that is normally still be green is dry and brown.
Did you grow up in the environment where you had to care about whether it rained or not? Is this something new for you?
I grew up in an ag community. My parents weren't farmers, but I grew up in an ag community, so we saw it, in the community, how everybody else was reacting. But definitely marrying into a farming family, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it seems to me that if you don't have any relationship with something like farming, or that you need it to rain, then like you really are kind of disconnected, not just from the seasons, but from like the pulse of the earth. And so I think it's a weird thing when you all of a sudden start paying attention to the rain and it actually matters to you whether or not it rains. Things like prayer seem to make more sense in that context, because you don't have anything else you can do other than pray that this thing happens, because if it doesn't happen, all could be lost.
Well, and I even like kind of a funny add on to that is my daughters were at daycare the other day and they came home with like a little sign that said "Rain, rain, go away." And I was like, we do not sing that song in this family. Like,
checking out this podcast short. If you'd like to listen to the rest of the interview, it's linked below. And if you like this kind of conversation, you may want to consider joining the Articulate Ventures Network. That's a place where people meet other podcast listeners, get to be a part of a digital neighborhood, and really get a chance to practice things like how they write, their speaking skills, and have a place where they can have an open dialogue with people that want to discuss ideas and leave all of the insults and the craziness of regular social media out of it. So if you're interested, go to network.articulate.ventures.